I know that no matter how I approach this topic, some of you will be offended. Anytime we talk about money, it's inevitable. It tends to just evoke pretty strong feelings about how it should be handled and spent. And look, your money is your money. You can do whatever you want with it. No one's forcing you to spend it a certain way just by watching this video. But I'm going to tell you what I think about programs like Affirm and others that allow you to pay things off over time, things like gaming PCs, and why I think those are generally bad ideas. Are you ready? Stay with me. Celebrating Intel Gamer Days, where you can find your favorite Intel-powered products at great prices for a limited time starting August 25th. Shop entry-level Intel Core i3 processors for budget-friendly gaming solutions, or step into the big leagues with Intel Core i7 and Core i9 SKUs like the 12700K and 12900K. You can find great hardware combos from HP, including the Victus 15 featuring an Intel Core i7 12700 and RTX 3060, as well as the Omen 45L, part of their premium gaming lineup, and packing an unlocked Intel Core i7 12700K and RTX 3060 with plenty of space for activities. Also, take up to 10% off select HP gaming products powered by Intel by using codes 5Gamer2022 and 10Gamer2022. Check the video description for more details. So let's start with the basics. When it comes to more approachable consumer goods like computers, you typically have two options. You either buy outright or finance and make payments over time. And Affirm is just one of many companies that offers this kind of service. According to a recent study by Morning Consult, 17% of US adults used a quote buy now, pay later loan in the month of June alone in 2022. You'll often see promos like 4 interest-free payments every 2 weeks, or 0% APR for 12 months. And they'll place these messages right next to product prices at checkout to encourage you to at least consider alternative forms of payment. Now, on the surface, they sound fine and dandy. I mean, why pay all at once when you can pay the exact same amount in increments over time? And this is what most people stick to when they defend companies like this. They say, well, it just makes sense. Why would I spend more than I have to in the immediate? It seems like a life hack, somehow circumventing the time value of money. And if you approach a larger purchase with this mentality, it might actually make sense. But far too often, folks fall into these programs with false senses of security. They justify these purchase methods with statements like, well, what if I need a gaming PC now, but don't get paid for another 2 weeks? Or, what if I don't make enough money to buy this outright? How distasteful of you to tell me what I can and can't afford. But have you ever actually wondered what happens when you don't pay these things off every 2 weeks or every month? What if your pay cycles stretch beyond the aforementioned term? Do you still keep your 0% interest? And perhaps more importantly, how do companies like Affirm actually make money? Because if we can answer that question, we can pretty much answer everything else in this video. Well, truth be told, it's all in the fine print. It has to be. It has to be disclosed somewhere, and they choose to put it in really tiny text, maybe in hopes that nobody reads it. That's usually how it is. But you should always read the fine print when it comes to money lending, because you can find yourselves in a heap of trouble if you don't. Now, to be clear, we aren't trying to single out Affirm here. There are many, many companies promoting the exact same business models. We're just using them because they came up in a previous video of ours. And to be fair, Affirm is not the worst of these offenders, if you want to call them that. There are worse companies out there, companies with worse terms, and they keep things even more vague intentionally to, in my view, attempt to deceive their potential customers. Now, on Affirm's website, they have a How It Works page. On it, they mention the need to be pre-qualified, which typically involves a soft credit pull, similar to how something like Credit Karma would work. They can see your credit history, but it doesn't affect your score. It's not a hard pull as if you were going to a dealership, let's say, and trying to buy a car. That would affect your credit score. In this case, it does not. They're just glancing at the surface level of your credit, and this helps them gauge whether or not you're a trustworthy borrower. Not that it matters much in the grand scheme of things. Also, note that Affirm might ask for other proofs of either identity or income verification, and then they'll tailor available programs based on this implied viability. You may not even qualify for the 0% APR they so abundantly promote online. And Affirm's terms of service mention the pulling of consumer reports periodically, not just once in the beginning, including by its bank partners, not just Affirm as an entity, throughout the loan terms. The Affirm uses other banks to supply some of these loans, and they can use these reports to build statistical analyses surrounding its services. They can also use this information for marketing purposes, so They get a lot out of this. Now, after the pre-qual, you'll be able to select your payment terms. Again, the selection will be limited to what a firm says you are worthy of based on their research. In a firm's case, they do have the standard 8-week payment structure involving zero interest, the one they promote so much online, which means if you're buying, let's say, a PC for $800, you can make 4 payments of $200 over 2 months. You won't pay any more than you otherwise would have outright. But, and this is where you just gotta stick with me, an 8-week term is extremely tight for a traditional lending structure of any kind. If you want to look at it like a payday lender, getting a check up front and then paying the lender back once you actually receive your check from your job, it's kind of similar to that, just not as scummy in my view, because at this point in 2022, at least in the States, they have to disclose so much more. And in my view, if you can pay off a system over 8 weeks, especially a system that costs $1,000 or more, you can probably save that money over 8 weeks and then buy it outright in cash at the end of that term. I think that's the safest way to do it, because in the case of PCs especially, these things aren't necessities, and if something comes up in life that requires that $1,000 or so in place of the computer, well, you're going to be pretty bummed out that you've already locked yourself into that 8-week payment plan, and you won't have as much money to spend on things that actually matter. I get that this doesn't apply to everyone, but I just think common sense finance dictates you save and then buy instead of finance, except in the cases where you're buying things that you absolutely need, like maybe a car or a house. Apart from external deals with brands, which we obviously can't account for, and the possible small processing or doc fee baked in, which a firm does mention in a few places, and I'm not sure if this is standard practice, this 8-week payment plan makes a firm little to no actual money from you, the borrower, though they often collect fees from merchants for handling payments on their behalves. And at least according to a firm, roughly 40% of all of their loans fall under this 0% APR category. The real money comes from interest, and you'll see that when you opt for the monthly installment plans. The examples on their site reference the same APRs, maybe 10% or 15% regardless of term, but bear in mind that longer payment structures typically incorporate higher interest rates. Same goes for car payments and even mortgages. Longer payment terms are riskier for lenders, so they offset this by jacking up interest payments in the short term. A firm has used interest rates in the past as high as 36%, which CNBC notes is higher than the APRs of most credit cards. So I would definitely weigh this against what you could do with a credit card, which you've already gone through the process of getting. You might as well use it, although I highly recommend in the case of credit cards as well that you pay them off monthly so that you don't accrue interest in the case that you don't have a 0% APR term. But the big question here is what happens when you fail to make a payment on time? Well, not what you'd expect, actually. In short, nothing. I mean, say you're a few days late, a firm, according to their site, won't charge late fees, but these patterns may be used against you should you decide to take additional loans from the company in the future. It affects your rep with the company, and these companies can also report their findings and your payment histories to credit agencies like Experian, which in turn can affect your credit score. And that's a more serious blow that you should be very aware of here. A firm's terms outline scenarios in which the company can collect, by the way, in full, all amounts due, all at once, and they can do this because they often require that either a bank account or credit card be connected throughout the loan's life. It's just another way of protecting themselves. This can also help them avoid the use of collection agencies, which is pretty much a last-ditch effort from any company to try to get even with you if you try to run off with a graphics card or something. They mentioned that they may record any and all communications with their borrowers, so if you're on the phone with them, they're probably recording, and they say that that's for their own protection, which means they'll probably use it against you should you fail to make timely payments, so keep that in mind. If you, for any reason, withdraw your consent to receive electronic or other communications, this one's a kicker. A firm reserves the right to close or limit access to your account and immediately collect all due amounts just for opting out of certain communications. It doesn't sound so nice. These companies don't play games. Here's one for you. Section 5 titled, How a Firm Will Resolve Disputes, Mandatory Arbitration. This section affects your rights. Please read carefully before agreeing to these terms. Yeah, you waive your right to a trial by jury in the event of a civil dispute. See, a firm handles its issues via binding arbitration, which basically means a single individual or small group determines what damages, if any, exist in a case. They even go so far as to rule out any jury trial in the event a claim proceeds to court for whatever reason, rather than arbitration, which is another attempt at a layer of added security for them, as most juries of one's peers, so folks like you and me, tend to look pretty disdainfully at lenders like these, regardless of the situation, particularly those that might appear predatory, and it would be, in my view, fairly easy to make these look predatory. You could very easily twist the situation to make it look that way. Bend the narrative, so to speak. Lawyers are very good at that. You have the right to opt out of this portion of the agreement. That's something I do want to mention, and you're required to do it via writing within 30 days of signing the agreement. I should note that this isn't super uncommon for, say, credit lenders and general credit cards. It's just something else you should note before getting involved, and another reason why I'd personally recommend you stay away. Ultimately, if you fail to make payments with the firm for more than 120 days on that shiny new PC you just financed, they reserve the right to charge off the loan. This means they'll write the loan off as a loss because they're basically giving up on the idea of collecting those payments, and then they'll probably sell that debt to a collections agency, at which point you'll have a separate issue to deal with, a separate entity. They'll be calling you, hounding you for any sort of payment at all to get even. And you can often deal with these agencies a different way. Usually the debt is bought at a huge discount, so you can negotiate with them and end up paying less than the actual price of the unit, or less than what you would have at least owed, the remaining balance on that charged off loan. I do not recommend you let it go this far, though. This is not like a get out of jail free card, because at that point your credit will be absolutely toast, and no one will lend you anything, because if you can't pay off a gaming PC worth $1,000, how the heck do they expect you to pay off a house or a car? You're probably going to default on those too, and so it just ruins any chance of obtaining any line of credit. Just avoid that at all costs. The whole point is to avoid this ever happening in the first place, right? Especially over something as ridiculous as a gaming PC that you don't really need unless you need it for work, which is not usually the case. But this opens up the door for large, quick payment chunks to be skipped, right? Or missed, or maybe showing up late. And if that happens, and maybe something unexpected in life pops up, you might have wished you hadn't financed the rig at all, and it could also end up affecting other things in life, like your viability for creditors down the line. This is a big reason why I condone just outright saving for rig versus financing. It keeps you honest, it keeps you just in a better habit of spending and saving, and it ensures you have the money in your pocket should circumstances change and the need for shiny tech suddenly disappear. It happens all the time, and those who say it won't happen to them, they're often the ones that are hit with the, they're just slapped by life. It happens to all of us. Now, all that said, there are actually some things I think are pretty good about a firm, including their openness about total payments, which, to be fair, is now a requirement by law. It used to be pretty bad, so there's that. You'll see exactly what the total out-of-pocket cost will be for the payment plan that you opt into, and that includes interest, so total including interest payments over time. Their interest also doesn't compound, which is good. It means you won't pay it on anything other than the principal, which in this case would be the original price of the PC or the component in question. And in the event you outright miss payments or are late on them, which please, please, please avoid that at all costs, just don't get mixed up in that mess. A firm will never include deferred interest, which means you won't be slapped with an interest rate other than the one you originally agreed to at the onset. So if you qualify for a 0% 8-week plan to begin with, which is the only one I recommend you consider if you're at all looking into this, you'll never pay interest on it, only principal balance. That at least is what I've gathered just from researching on their site. I think that in the case where you're approved for such great terms, you could probably justify opting in. I'm not going to say it outright shouldn't be considered at all. Though there are stories all across Reddit in particular of individuals with great credit only qualifying for terms that do include interest. So it's likely, product and sum dependent. And if you've used a firm before, building rep with them can help for better approval terms, I should say, in the future. So, if you've paid off a gaming PC in the past with them, then it shouldn't be as big an issue for them to loan a similar amount of money for another gaming PC in the future, because you've already proven that you can pay things off in the past. Just keep in mind, this can also work against you, not only for a firm, but for your credit as a whole, The negative stuff, they're almost certainly going to report to credit agencies, which will affect a lot more in your life than just whether or not you can buy a gaming PC. Again, there are certainly situations in life where, financing makes sense. You could easily make the case for a home. We all need roofs over our heads, and building equity is always nice. And cars, we need reliable transportation for work and family. But there comes a point where financing goes too far, and this is one of those examples in my book. In a lot of cases, many of these rent-to-own style lenders charge very, very high interest rates for even the most basic of products. Like a shiny, blinged out RGB gaming PC can be tempting for many who may not actually be able to afford them in the short term. And that's where financing becomes really the only option. And it's also where folks can dig very deep fiscal holes for themselves. My rule of thumb for things that are smaller than, let's say, a car, only finance things like gaming PCs if you don't need to finance. Maybe you can make a valid case for keeping the extra money in your pocket, whether it be, a short-term investment or an upcoming large expense. And certainly do not finance if any interest rate other than 0% is involved. And if you're a value guy like me, you got to think about it this way. This will throw off the value proposition of the item in question because the effective overall price of the good now increases because of the interest. But this can also, again, potentially damage your credibility with other more important lenders in the future, like actual banks and credit companies. And all of that just isn't worth the risk over a single frickin' gaming PC. It's just not. Just save. Try to save. That's my recommendation. So to wrap things up, these points are largely why I've never used and will never use a pay-to-own website for discretionary purchases. Keyword there, discretionary, things you don't need but just kind of want. But I understand that my opinion isn't the only one out there. So let me know in the comments if you've used one of these sites in the past and whether or not you ever would again. What was your experience like with that lender? Thanks so much for watching. Consider subscribing and sticking around for the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning.